So it is my honor to introduce our next speaker, who will be joining us online, which is Julie Inman, Australia's eSafety Commissioner. So Julie is widely regarded as one of the world's leading voices when it comes to online safety. Her career spans the US Congress, 17 years at Microsoft, as well as senior policy and government relation roles at Twitter and also Adobe. So since becoming commissioner in 2017, she has significantly expanded the impact of the eSafety Office, launched world-first initiatives, and helped shape the global best practice throughout her leadership. So in this keynote, Julie will deepen our conversation by examining the critical role social media and digital services play when it comes to children's lives, as well as what meaningful protection looks like. So she will also speak to us about Australia's new and somewhat controversial piece of legislation coming into effect on the 10th of December, a social media age delay for young people under the age of 16, often referred to as the social media ban. So please join me in welcoming virtually Commissioner Julie Inman-Grant.
Thank you so much. Maybe some nodding. It's wonderful to join, and I loved listening in to the young people. We have a youth advisory committee, and I often find that the insights that come from young people are much more insightful than some of us adults can come up with. And there's so much that unites us rather than divides us in terms of what young people and policymakers around the globe are thinking about. So what I thought I'd do today is I will touch on the social media age restriction bill, particularly given the recent vote in the US, in the EU Parliament. But what I wanted to start with was kind of grounding you in our 10-year history, explaining our model, which is quite unique, although some of the different EU countries or their DSCs may be replicating some of these functions, and then explain how the social media minimum age, as we call it, actually fits into our broader tool set to keep Australians safer online. And whilst we believe that this will really represent a monumental change in online safety policy and regulation, this legislation really has a very limited and focused role as an age restriction bill. And so the whole idea is keeping under 16s from having or holding an age-restricted social media account. So next slide, please. So eSafety is Australia's independent national online safety regulator and our educator, and we are the first of its kind. We were established in 2015, and we started as the Children's eSafety Commissioner, and we started with we're the hotline, so we take reports of child sexual abuse material and terrorist content, but we set up the world's first cyberbullying scheme to serve as a safety net. When young people were threatened, intimidated, harassed, or humiliated, they reported to the social media site and it didn't come down. Young people or their parents or educators could come to us and we would intervene on their behalf, often working informally with the platforms because often context and culture were missed to get this harmful content down. And then the quicker we can do that, we know that the harm is remediated much more quickly. When I started in January 2017, we started to have quite a bit of success with these programs, and the Parliament decided to expand our remit to covering all Australians and helping them have safer, more positive experiences online. We've had our legislation reviewed twice already and have had some significant reforms. The social media minimum age was just legislated about a year ago, and as said, will come into full force pending a High Court constitutional challenge next week. Next slide, please. What I want to do is explain our overall operating model or approach. We call this the 3 Ps. So we start with prevention to provide evidence-based safety resources and programs. Protection comes in operating our regulatory schemes and how we investigate abuse. But what was missing for me was how do we become an anticipatory regulator and see technology trends happening before they hit us in the face? how do we place more of the burden on the platforms themselves for safety rather than having regulators play whack-a-mole, or children or adults experience the harm without any repercussions? So we also have a future casting function, which helps us anticipate and then change our tool set. And of course, all of this is governed by partnerships, which is absolutely fundamental to what we do. So the next slide, to prevention. Our ultimate goal, of course, is to prevent online harms from happening in the first place, especially to young Australians. So we have kind of cradle to grave resources. We know that Australian 2-year-olds, about 42%, have access to a digital device by the time they're 4 years old. It's 94%. Obviously, with children being given the digital devices by their parents. But this, of course, continues into primary school, to the tween years, the teen years, adults, and for older Australians. And we know that older Australians are the least represented population online, yet they are the most vulnerable to social engineering. So we want to stop it at the start by giving tools and making sure that these materials are co-designed, for instance, with young people, for young people. So not about us, without us is a motto. Next slide, please. I just wanted to quickly walk through our regulatory schemes. We have systemic powers around transparency, very much like the DSA powers. We also have codes and standards, which I'll talk about, but our complaint schemes are where we take reports from the public when there's child cyberbullying, when there is image-based abuse, which is the non-consensual sharing of intimate images and videos, and that also includes deep fakes. And we have a 98% success rate in terms of getting that out. Based on the success of the child cyberbullying scheme in 2021, we also set up an adult cyber abuse scheme where we're generally dealing with very high-end cases of cyber stalking, doxing, or direct threats of, say rape and death threats. And we get about 80,000 reports a year, and we've got a population of about 26 million people. So next slide, please. Back to age. We have codes and standards that cover 8 different sectors of the technology industry, everything from device level manufacturing to search engines to ISPs to social media sites, and then a few broader categories. In June of this year, our illegal content scheme came into force, and I'll talk to you about some of our enforcement actions. But tomorrow, we are releasing our regulatory guidance for our harm code. And what this will do, it will require all of the industry players up and down the technology stack to restrict access to harmful content, including pornography, explicit violence, self-harm, suicidal ideation, and disordered eating, to under 18s. What will happen later this month is search engines will be required to blur all pornographic and violent content when people are searching. It doesn't require uploading any ID. If you're an adult and you want to continue on, then you can click right through. But what we know from our research and from working with young people is that 1 in 3 young people under the age of 13 have had their first encounter with pornography or online violence when they are not seeking it out, using search engines as a gateway. And young Australians have described this to us as unwelcome, unsolicited, and in your face. We also recently saw, when we classified the Charlie Kirk assassination video and the video of Arina Ryskova, who was the Ukrainian student who was stabbed on a Charlotte train, that was deemed refused classification material here. So it means it was illegal to be shown or hosted here. That the companies are doing a very poor job of applying what we call interstitials or sensitive content labels. And so the blurring of this prevents people from seeing this accidentally or incidentally. And so we're excited about this, and I'll talk to you about how this will also apply to AI chatbots and companions coming in March. Now, the next slide is about safety by design. Um, we use a little bit of carrot and stick. And when I was Microsoft's global head of privacy and online safety from 2009 to 2012, and I was doing product reviews, and we were looking for security vulnerabilities and potential data breaches, there was no safety by design program, which concerned me at the time because we had just acquired Skype, and that was known as a vector for live stream child sexual abuse material. I tried to bring that to the executives as an internal safety antagonist and was told, no, we're becoming an enterprise company. And so when I had the opportunity to become the eSafety Commissioner, I thought this is something I want to do with industry rather than to industry. And I very much think about safety by design and what we're requiring these companies to do, very much like 60 years ago when a man named Ralph Nader wrote a book called Unsafe at Any Speed. And he brought traffic fatality data to Congress and to parliaments and legislative bodies around the world to show that if the seatbelts were embedded in the cars, that they would save untold lives. And today we get into our cars and we almost take for granted that there are anti-lock brakes and there are airbags and there are bumper bars and rear door sensors, and car manufacturers compete on safety. But at that time, they pushed back. And what we believe is that the technology industry should really have their seatbelt moment and should be assessing the risks and harms upfront, embedding the safety at the beginning rather than retrofitting after the damage has been done. So I was so pleased to hear the Vice President talking about safety by design as a foundation of the DSA, as it is in many other legislative schemes around the world, including our own. I've just met last week with Discord, TikTok, and Match.com. They've all set up safety by design divisions, which I think is not the sole answer, because safety needs to become a more important goal than profit making, but it is a step in the right direction. I think we'd all agree. Next slide, please. So I would say that in terms of any kind of regulator in the world, all of us who work in online safety regulation work squarely within an international nexus. That means that all of our regulatory targets for Europeans and for Australians are domiciled overseas. And of course, our most important regulatory partners are offshore as well. And we engage internationally because we know that the internet has no borders and that online safety is a global issue. It concerns powerful global companies and requires a cohesive and coordinated response. When we set up in 2010, we were the only regulator for the first 7 years. But when the UK and Ireland and Fiji came on board in 2022, we got together and we set up the Global Online Safety Regulators Network. And if you go to the next slide, while I wasn't able to join, the Director General, Roberto Viola, and his team, and Dame Melanie Dawes, we had a very important tripartite roundtable on child protection. And again, through those deliberations, we just saw how much is really uniting us rather than dividing us in terms of child protection, and particularly age verification and other forms of age assurance. Next slide, please. You may know that we've used a range of our remedial powers to take action when there is an online crisis event as a deterrent for future individual perpetration. We, like you, have come up against companies like X and Telegram in their failure to comply with our transparency notices around serious issues like child sexual abuse material and TVEC. But probably our most high-profile case was in April 2024, when an Assyrian bishop in Wakeley, Sydney, was brutally stabbed by a radicalized teenager at a parish. It was declared a terrorist incident by the New South Wales Police Commissioner. It generated a violent riot in the community, and it was classified as illegal content here. And while every other major platform decided to take it down, X decided that he'd take us to court and, of course, referred to me to his 200 million followers as the eSafety commissar trying to regulate the global internet. While the result of that case was that X Corp globally geo-blocked the content in Australia so Australians couldn't use it. The challenge, of course, with that is that meant that that same violent content was available everywhere else in the world on X. And the very sad end note to that is that Axel Rudakabana, who was the 17-year-old who stabbed those 3 innocent little girls at a dance studio in Southport, UK, told sentencing hearings that that very same Wakely video is inspiration for stabbing those little girls. So we know that if we're preventing young people in particular from seeing this content, it normalizes, it desensitizes, it sometimes radicalizes. And here in Australia, of all the terrorism cases that are being investigated right now, the primary suspects are between the ages of 14 and 22, and they've all been radicalized of some way on the internet. So preventing access to violent content is important, and we do need to take on the tech giants when things are not going right. So then the next slide, please. I know that President van der Leyen's one of her important priorities is cyberbullying. And so I just wanted to briefly share for you, if you ever want to go on to esafety.gov.au or even replicate some of this content in your markets, we've developed a broad range of content called our Spotlight on Cyberbullying. And this is where, again, age matters, because what we're seeing is that the nature and demographics of cyberbullying are changing. The victims are getting younger, sometimes 8 or 9 years of age, yet the language and the threats are becoming more violent and corrosive. Next slide, please. So because we've had 10 years of complaints from the public, from young people in particular, I just wanted to give you a little bit of insight into the changing demographics of cyberbullying. Obviously, bullying has been around from time immemorial. It's a human behavior that is facilitated by technology. But like I said, we're seeing earlier digital exposure. For almost 20 years, the average age was about 14. It was girls more than boys. It was almost always peer-to-peer and tied to conflict happening within the school gates. But now we're seeing platforms being weaponized that weren't traditionally associated with harm. And one example is Pinterest, another is Google Forms. But recently, we've seen Spotify playlists being used as cyberbullying tools, where they would curate playlists targeting a specific child with song lyrics like, I don't know, Beat It, Promiscuous, and Thank You Next, as a way of targeting that. We're also seeing much more coded language with emojis and acronyms that subtly target or isolate peers, and it's very apparent to a young person and their peers, but educators or parents or other supervising adults are not the wiser. Like I said, the language is becoming more aggressive and sexual. KYS is a popular phrase. Many of you may know this is go kill yourself, which of course you never know who is on the other end of that and what they're going through. And so these are very serious escalations that we're seeing. But finally, we're seeing forms of AI being used, whether it's through fake images, impersonation, or content that spreads quickly. If you go to the next slide, I'll show you a little bit more. We're seeing more voice cloning being used, as well as face swapping technologies. So showing or playing voices, showing young people doing insane things they didn't actually do or say. And by the time that goes viral, a person doesn't have the opportunity to correct the fact or say that this is unreality or misinformation. We're seeing more body-based insults created through manipulating photos or using videos, using AI for the purpose of body shaming. At one point, TikTok had a chubby filter, which thankfully they've now withdrawn. We're seeing other forms of generative AI being used to bully. Next slide, please. I know that AI deepfakes are a serious concern for all European countries. Around the time we started seeing almost an epidemic in schools of deepfake image-based abuse, I did see reports that this was happening in Spain. Next slide, please. The scenario is usually the same. It tends to be a young teenage boy that will harvest images of his female classmates, sometimes 7 to 10 at a time. Will use relatively cheap apps that can declothe or denudify in a very hyper-realistic way, not understanding what they're doing is actually criminal. They are creating synthetic child sexual abuse material. Also not always understanding what they think might be a little bit of a laugh is incredibly denigrating and harmful and humiliating to the victim survivor. So we've now seen a doubling of reports of deepfake image-based abuse into our image-based abuse scheme over the past 18 months compared to the 7 years prior. We do have a 98% success rate in terms of getting that content taken down. And now with our codes in force, we can find the purveyors and profiteers of these AI declothing apps up to $49.5 million. Next slide. So we're trying to take a comprehensive approach to the deepfake image-based abuse challenge rather than playing a game of whack-a-mole and remediating the harm once it's been done. We have taken action against a UK-based nudifying site that provides probably 6 of the world's most common nudifying and declothing apps. They market themselves as nudifying schoolgirls using powerful LLMs. Due to the threat of fines, they have now restricted access to Australia. But before that happened, we were seeing about 100,000 downloads a month from Australians. We've also taken Australian man to court who was habitually making deep fakes of female politicians and well-known sexual assault survivors. After 2 years, he had a $343,000 penalty and was arrested. We think this is a very important deterrent message to send to people that you cannot engage in this kind of abuse with total impunity. We also see that schools have not known how to deal with these incidents when they happen, and so the responses have been erratic. So what we've developed is a deepfake image-based abuse incident management tool as part of our tools for schools that is available for any and all of you to use. It tells the school principals how to collect evidence, how to treat the perpetrator, how to take good care of the victim survivors and the like. Next slide, please. In March of next year, I just want to share that, again, because age matters, we have instituted some codes that will prevent any AI chatbots or AI companions from delivering pornographic, sexually explicit, suicidal ideation, self-harm, or disordered eating content to under 18s in Australia. In October of last year, we learned from many schools that 11 to 13-year-old Australians were spending up to 5 or 6 hours a day with AI companions. They're often marketed as an antidote to loneliness. Some of them were inciting young people to engage in sexually explicit acts. And now we know that there are obviously cases in the US against OpenAI and Character AI around incitement to suicide. And we have a case in one of our states as well. So we're seeing this pattern of the AI companies engaging in the same kind of drag race or pattern of moving fast and breaking things that we saw with social media 20 years ago. And I believe if we don't get ahead of this, that the catastrophic harms of AI could be much more damaging than social media. So this is where we really need to work together to get ahead of some of these harms. Next slide, please. And this is just to say that some of our codes are working already. We've extracted commitments from Roblox to prevent adults from chatting or reaching out to child accounts, putting child accounts on the highest level of privacy default, and they are now going to age verify for their entire user base. The primary users are 5 to 13-year-olds, but their largest growing demographic is 24 and over. So they're full, it's a commingled platform now, full of adults, and not knowing who the parents are and who the predators are is a real problem. So they are committed to tackling this towards the end of the year. And unfortunately, yeah, Portugal hosted a really bad chat roulette site known as Omi TV when they didn't respond to us, and their holding company, Bad Kitty's Dad, which tells you something about the company. We went to Google and Apple, who have requirements under our App Store code to deplatform sites that pair sexual predators with pedophiles. They did respond after that. Once you take away and you use those app stores as an effective choke point, these apps can no longer be distributed or monetize these dangerous applications. Next slide, please. So now I will turn to the social media age restrictions. And I was pleased to see the Compare refer to it as a social media delay, because it isn't an absolute ban or a prohibition. And this is probably an interesting admission, but I was very concerned and raised reservations about such a blunt force tool being used before this is deliberated. And I used an analogy of Australian water safety to explain why I thought this was going to be hard. About 40 or 50 years ago, a lot of Australians have swimming pools because we have beautiful weather. I'm sorry, I know it's winter there. But due to tragic backyard drownings, there was a requirement that fences be put around every single pool, and it is backed with enforcement. If you do not have a fence around your pool, you'll be fined a lot of money. And that was very similar to the analogy. Schools in Australia started banning phones about 2 or 3 years ago. And they have found more productivity in schools. They have found that kids are talking more to each other across the cafeteria. And another surprising finding was they needed to buy more sporting equipment because kids were not texting across the playground. They actually wanted to play. But banning social media to me was a whole different proposition. The analogy to me was, this is like fencing the entire ocean. And what we do on the beaches of Australia, where we have rips like algorithmic rips and we have sharks, is we teach kids to swim between the flags. We put shark nets up where there are predators, and we teach kids about how to swim with rips and let them be taken out so that they don't get tired out and drowned. And this is the same kind of approach I thought needed to be applied to online safety. We have to have a holistic approach where we are teaching our kids to swim. We are building their critical reasoning skills and enhancing their digital resilience and teaching them digital literacy skills while we are providing protective scaffolding. But the more that we've been focused on this, I really do think raising the age from 13 to 16 gives kids valuable time to build those digital skills, and it keeps them away from these very powerful and unseen forces that even adults are powerless to fight against. The pervasive and persuasive design features like opaque algorithms and autoplay and endless scroll and snap streaks, they are designed to keep us all addicted. We wanted to do that without cutting off young people's digital lifelines. And as I heard the young panel speaking, we have a lot of the same issues in Australia. I was very worried about vulnerable communities like those who are LGBTQI+, First Nations, Australians, and those with a disability who have told us for years that they feel more on themselves online than they do in the real world. This is how they find their tribe. So again, we didn't want to cut off their lifelines. As a result, the Parliament did make some exclusions around messaging platforms and some online gaming platforms. So I'll walk through a little bit more what this looks like. Next slide, please. And I think I just expand why it's not an absolute ban. It's a social media delay. Another reason that's important language is because the way that parents talk to kids, it's not saying you're never going to have a smartphone or social media. It's really you're just not ready yet. And what this change does for parents is the government backs them in saying, um, not are you only, oh, do I not think you're ready? The government is saying it is not legal for social media platforms to allow under 16s to have or hold a social media account. So while there won't be any penalties for parents or young people who try and circumvent the rules, the burden will fall on the platforms, and I'll explain how. And we believe the harms are real. We did some very extensive research with young people and their parents that we released in June that found that that 96% of 10 to 15-year-olds already had a social media account or access to social media. 70% encountered harmful material online. 75% of them saw it on social media, not the broader internet. And 1 in 7 had experienced online grooming behavior from either adults or older teenagers 4 or 5 years older than them. Next slide, please. I wanted to make sure, and I know Europe will be focused on this, that we did this and we implemented in a way that was supporting the digital rights and the best interests of the child, and to make sure that it was reasonable, necessary, and proportionate. And we had our Youth Advisory Council involved in inquiries. They testified before Parliament. They put submissions in to shape the policy, and they've shaped a lot of our education materials that are going to young people. Next slide, please. So how will it work? So under the law, the responsibility lies with the age-restricted social media platforms to detect and either deactivate or remove existing accounts held by under 16s. As we all know, they have a lot of data on us already, and many of them have had age inference technologies, which look at different behavioral signals that indicate at a pretty high degree age. So are you logging in before and after school? 13-year-olds generally speak to other 13-year-olds. Natural language processing shows them a lot about your grammar, your emojis, how you're using acronyms, about your age. But what we're asking them to do is apply a layered or waterfall approach. Next slide, please. Now, this won't be interesting for the young people, but what I would say to the policymakers in this room is you could probably, and we're happy to share, where we found some of the drafting of the legislation made implementation pretty tricky and lots of mental gymnastics. Instead of giving us a harms or risk-based assessment tool, we were given what is called a sole purpose or a significant purpose of online social media interaction. So we developed self-assessment tools for a broad range of companies to assess whether or not their sole or significant purpose was online social interaction. As you would understand, there is no straight line. And we saw a lot of very interesting shape-shifting, whereas 2 years ago, Snapchat and YouTube, Pinterest and others identified themselves as social media sites. Snapchat was suddenly a camera app and then a messaging app. Pinterest was a visual search engine, and YouTube was a video sharing platform. Obviously it is, but it's also a social media site that uses some of these pervasive design features as well. So while we don't have any specific declaratory powers, using this test, and they self-assessed and we assessed based on these legal provisions, there are 10 companies that are now considered age-restricted social media platforms. And this is Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, X, Twitch, Reddit, and YouTube. And then there are a number that are excluded. Next slide, please. So we consulted with about 160 organizations, and the deepest consultation was with young people themselves. And we decided to take a principles-based approach. Our regulatory guidance is relatively modest. It's 55 pages. It's a pretty interesting read. But let's go to the next slide. I wanted to let you know that while we were building the plane as we were flying it in terms of developing the reasonable steps on how this would work, the government conducted an age assurance technology trial where we tested 50 different technologies. Almost all of them had an AI component to them, but they range from facial age estimation technologies and analysis, parental consent tools, broader ID verification tools, what we call successive validation, even a technology out of France called Border Age that looked at the biomechanics of hand movements and using AI to detect at a very high level. And what I would say is the age assurance industry has come such a long way, even in 2 years. Almost all of the technologies tested performed as expected. We looked at accuracy, robustness, efficacy, and also that it was privacy preserving. And a large proportion of them reached the highest level of technical readiness. So whenever a social media company said, oh, the technology is not mature enough, we can't do it, we said, okay, well, you've got your proprietary tools, but we've just tested this set of third-party tools. We know that they can work if they're deployed correctly. And if you deploy them with this waterfall or this successive layered approach, there won't be a single point of failure. So next slide, please. So what are we asking the platforms to do? So we've asked them to communicate with kindness and compassion to those under 16 that they've identified 2 weeks in advance. We've seen Meta, Snap, and Kik have done so thus far, YouTube this week, and we expect TikTok will be doing so tomorrow, to let them know that their accounts will be deactivated or removed. They're also responsible for preventing what we call recidivism, or the re-registration by underage users. As I said, they have to use layered age assurance methods, but we know that some are going to fall through the cracks. So they have to have clear user reporting tools, but also appeals processes in case they overblock. They have to commit to continuously monitoring and improving their systems, and also being very transparent about how they're measuring the efficacy and reporting back to us. Next slide, please. What are we not asking them to do? We are not asking them to verify an entire user base or a whole age of all users. We think this is disproportionate and could be very disruptive and upsetting to a range of adults. So we said it wouldn't be acceptable. While government or digital ID can be one form of age assurance, it cannot be the only form, because so many people are concerned about sharing their government ID. People of my vintage are much more comfortable with that. We found that younger generations, Alpha and Z, are much more comfortable with selfies and liveness tests and facial age estimation that's done privately and well. We didn't prescribe any specific technologies or measures that they had to use. We just need to see systemically that they're effective working together. I didn't think I knew the user base or the technology infrastructure better than the companies, and we didn't want to pick winners or losers in the age assurance market. But we will make sure that our compliance and enforcement efforts, which are up to, for again, almost $50 million for a breach, we will be looking at systemic failures. We also had a number of platforms that wanted to strip out the social media elements and just offer a stripped down messaging service or video service. We said, okay, if you do that, you can't just shunt all of your under 16s over to a new platform. You would have to ask for explicit consent and parental consent, and we would have to assess those separately. So I think most of those ideas have been abandoned. The next slide, please. Just want to let you know, we've also, watched what's been happening around the world with the UK age assurance trials. We expect that there will be migratory patterns and surges in VPN use and other forms of circumventions. So again, the burden is on the platforms to prevent both location-based circumvention through the use of VPNs, where they'll have to re-age verify, but also age-related systems, which can be vulnerable to spoofing, as we know. Next slide, please. What I think is important, and we decided to do off our own bat, is that we are doing an extensive longitudinal evaluation of the implementation of this and the impacts this will actually have on young people, both the benefits, but also the unintended consequences. So we formed an academic advisory group of specialists from Australia and around the world that specialize at the intersection of youth mental health and technology. And we'll be looking at everything from, are kids sleeping better? Are they interacting more? Are they playing more sport? Are they reading more books? Are they taking less Ritalin or antidepressants? Are their phone bills going down? We're going to look at a very widespread data, including our test scores improving. And again, as I said, we'll look at the unintended consequences as well. We'll look at, was 16 the right age, or should it be 15, or should it be 18? And all of that data will be available for other countries around the world to learn from our implementation. So both our successes and our mistakes. But we think this will contribute to a lot of the efforts that others are taking around the world. We've got extensive, next slide, resources at eSafety.gov.au. You can check out our social media age restriction hub. And with the last slide, I would just say what we're trying to do with all this, and I know the Europeans are trying to achieve the same thing, is we're trying to put more friction into the system that previously didn't exist. And by using all of these different tools, from education and digital literacy to safety by design, to the complaint schemes, the systemic codes and standards and transparency powers, and now these social media age restrictions, we think collectively this will have a major positive impact. And we look forward to being partners with you in keeping the online world a safer, more positive place for all of the world's citizens. So thank you.
So thank you, Commissioner, for your thought-provoking keynote, as well as for helping us deepen the discussion on safer online environments, particularly at this time that Australia moves towards implementing this new major piece of legislation. So your keynote offered much food for thought. We were supposed to have a Q&A where the young people could ask questions as well as the not so young people, but we're running a little bit out of time. So I'll just ask a question in name of all youth. This is a doubt that we all have regarding the age delay. So a growing body of evidence shows that bans and age-based restrictions are often ineffective, and sometimes they can be very harmful. So we were wondering, because they push people and young people to use workarounds or less safe spaces to get to the information. And also, when they actually reach these platforms, they don't have the amount of digital literacy or education to deal with the things they get confronted with. So we were wondering, how does the age delay Australia is implementing going to avoid repeating these kinds of patterns?
I think that's a great question, which is precisely why we're doing the evaluation. Again, we've identified a range of exclusions or exceptions that were written into the legislation by Parliament around messaging and gaming apps. So there are a range there that you, from WhatsApp to Messenger to Roblox and others, that will not be captured by the ban. We're continuing to talk to other platforms where we expect migration to happen, whether it's Lemonade or Yubo or Blue Sky. and many of these platforms are really designed for 18 plus users. And so they won't probably be accepting big surges of migration of underage users. I do expect, and part of the guidance that we've given to parents and young people in terms of downloading their messages is setting up group chats and making other resources where they can connect, create, and communicate together. So again, the idea is keeping young people away from the harmful and deceptive design features that are baked into social media sites, so that they can continue to search out information on the internet, sometimes in darker areas of the web. But that's why we're trying to make these other platforms safer as well through our codes and standards, as I know a number of other jurisdictions are.
Thank you so much for your virtual presence here today, Commissioner. And just to say that during the evening, we'll have opportunity for asking questions and discussing, and to tell you that we'll go on a short coffee break until 10:45. So I'll hope to see you later, and good break.
Thank you so much.